Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Private 5G and Airports Ready for Takeoff, sponsored by Betacom. Hope everyone is doing well. Spring in the air. Glad you could join us here today. My name is Justin Barkowski. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs with the American Association of Airport Executives. We are very pleased to present today's webinar on 5G, which has been a super hot topic in the airport community this year and a little bit of last year as well. Although there were some negative connotations with that context earlier this year because of the Verizon and AT&T rollout of their C-band network. We're going to cover a little bit about that today, but mostly we're going to be talking about the positives of 5G and the benefits that private networks can bring in the airport environment, and why some airports have already started to invest in these technologies, these networks, to both improve the passenger journey and improve your business operations. So we have two really great speakers here today to discuss these topics. I'm super happy to be with them. I'll be facilitating the conversation. But first, I did want to run through a few housekeeping items just for all of your awareness, as we normally do with these webinars and virtual meetings. If you have a question for one of the speakers, and I highly encourage you to engage early and often, we have plenty of time allocated for questions, so we want to make sure we get to all of yours and make this a little bit more conversational with your participation. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure we get to those questions. There's going to be a chat box on your screen. Be sure to use that for all of those questions and comments. If you experience any technical issues throughout the next hour, please reach out to us via email. You can send a note to AAAE meetings@AAAE.org. If you want to rewatch the webinar, you can do so. You will be able to access the recording using the same link that you used to access the webinar here today. That link will be available shortly after the webinar. At the end of the webinar, you're also going to receive an email from us, a quick evaluation survey. Your feedback is always important as we help to make improvements for future webinars. Survey is very short, so it should only take a minute or two for you to do that. I did also want to note before we get going, in the resources section of the platform that you're using here today, you can find the Betacom report. It's called the Private 5G and Airports Ready for Takeoff, the same as this webinar. It has a lot of really great information. I've read through it myself. Highly encourage you to do it as well. The speakers may actually reference the document during the discussion here today. Has a lot of information, so I encourage you to download it and review it if you haven't already done so. So with that out of the way, I did want to introduce our speakers for today. First, I have the pleasure of introducing Johan Bjorklund, who's the CEO of Betacom. Johan has decades of experience in the telecommunications industry, and we're obviously super excited to have him here today. Second, we have Monica Paolini, who is the founder and principal of Senza Fili. She's an expert in wireless technologies and working with clients to help use those technologies through a variety of applications, both in airports and other environments. You can view their biographies on the website if you use the link that you use to access this platform here today. There's a lot more information about the both of them, so we encourage you to check that out. But Monica, I think we're going to start with you with some opening remarks and comments to get us going here today, and then we'll bring on Johan, and then we'll have a good discussion. So over to you.
Thanks, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to talk about what's going on in the airports and how we can get to the airports of the future. I am an analyst, so some of you might know me because I've been writing about this, and I'm going to talk about a report today. But over the last, I would say, 20 years or probably even more, I've been working with transportation agencies also on the procurement side. And this is going to date me, but the first project was about satellites because it was the only thing that we could be possibly deployed. So said that, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the report, but you can read the report, so I don't want to just duplicate efforts. And initially, I thought I'm going to tell you all that the new wireless technologies can do for you. But then I realized that you guys, you in the audience, know much better than I do what is that you want to do. So what I would like you to do is to think, what is that you see in your airport or your airline or whoever you're working on would like to do better or to do that you're not currently doing today? And I would like you to ask you to enter that in the comment in the chat so that we can see. And so I really would like to hear from you. And I haven't seen your answers, or I'm not seeing the answers as you type them in right now. But what I bet you is that for most of them, if not all of the things you want to do, connectivity is going to be a key requirement. If there is no connectivity, it's very hard to introduce change, to have new services, better functionality, more cost-effective type of operations. So we'll see that later. But so at the core of the transformation, of the digital transformation of the airports that are going to take you to the airport of the future, there is connectivity. Now, connectivity is nothing new. Every airport has many different networks already. So what is that we're talking about? I think what we're talking about is the right connectivity. It's not just connectivity, and it's not just connecting people. It's not just connecting a few terminals. It's a broad connectivity, be able to connect to anybody and anything, but also it's the right connectivity. Now you might say, well, but right, what does right mean? It's a vague concept. Yes, it is a vague concept, intentionally so. And this is because connectivity doesn't come in one size or with one set of parameters. What is important is to have the flexibility to have the type of connectivity that you need for what you're trying to do. And this could be along multiple dimensions. So, for instance, you have latency, speed, security, reliability, power life coverage. So, for instance, if you have a sensor out in the field, power life, so the ability to have a long power life for the device is crucial, but throughput is not. On the other hand, if you have a camera, then the throughput is the ability to have a high throughput and a relatively low latency is quite important. For some operational applications, you require a very low latency. So if you are controlling vehicles out there in the fields, having a very low latency, a reliable low latency is crucial, because if you don't, you might end up having damage to assets or people. So it's not a detail. So the real challenge and the real opportunity is to be able not only to connect, but to connect with the right in the right way. And so it's the flexibility that you need on top of obviously having the ability to do so. And this is where what we're going to be talking today comes in, the fact that 5G and private networks allow you to do that. And so you already have, as I said, you have a lot of networks. You have Wi-Fi, you have LMR, you have a lot of networks. What happens oftentimes with the legacy solutions is that you tend to have specific networks or specific applications or tasks, right? And now with 5G and private networks, where you can have a broad infrastructure that can be used in a flexible way to support all those applications, and you can add them. So let's say there is something that you haven't thought about, you just completely new, that comes up 2 years from now, you have your networks, you can add it in. So this is really important. It's the fact that you have the flexibility to, on day one, implement what you already know that you want, that you might already have, and you move from legacy to a new system that is open and allows you more flexibility, but you don't have to do everything on day one, and probably you will not. But then you have an infrastructure that allows you to add on top whenever you need it for applications that you haven't even thought about. But for sure they will come up. And so this is the key novelty, the key enabler is the ability to have a platform for many different things. And I didn't tell you this before, but on a different report, we asked airports what is that they wanted to do, and we came up with over 200 applications. So there is a huge variety of things that you can think of doing out there. And so the question is that how can you manage? How can you manage different priorities? Because some applications, as I said before, we need the right connectivity. So some applications need more bandwidth. Some applications have a higher priority. The airport knows how to manage all those different trade-offs and how to balance the whole thing, both on behalf of your applications and also those of airlines and other tenants. So this is really, really crucial. And this is where control comes in. So it's really important that you are able to control the network so you can manage the priorities as you need. And with that, I will let Johan explain to you how exactly you're going to do that. So thank you so much. Johan, over to you.
All right, thanks a lot, Monica. Appreciate the introduction. I'm very happy to be here. So Betacom has been in the wireless space for more than 30 years now. We have built 2G, 3G, 4G, and actually 5G networks as well. And we've built those for the wireless carriers, the telcos. We have large scale deployments. We have also deployed at airports, at sports arenas, et cetera, et cetera. So our core competence is really, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G wireless is design, and there's also construction. What we added to our portfolio last year was the ability to monitor and run these networks as well. Having been in the wireless space for a long time, I thought it was a fantastic opportunity when the FCC decided to open up 3.5 gigahertz spectrum, which is fantastic spectrum for wireless, and to do so to allow enterprises to basically have their own wireless networks, and taking advantage of all the opportunities that 4G and 5G allows for, which has a lot to do with security, has a lot to do with control, etc. So that's why we jumped into this space, because we saw that there was a really good opportunity here, just like Monica talked about, to differentiate some of the services that airports and airlines already had, with Wi-Fi. The problem with Wi-Fi though is that Wi-Fi gets really congested, because the spectrum that Wi-Fi operates in is very limited, and no matter how many Wi-Fi networks you have, you still have very limited spectrum there. So what happens in many places, including at airports, is you get passengers coming through, and as passengers are coming through, as a large aircraft lands and everybody fires up their terminals, their devices, they start using Wi-Fi. Now the capacity more or less dwindles. So business critical applications such as luggage scanning or onboarding applications, etc., they stop working for a period of time, usually at the busiest hours of the day. So one of the really good use cases for private wireless, for 4G and 5G networks and private wireless, is basically to replace the Wi-Fi network for these specific applications, business critical applications, to always make sure that these critical applications are up and running. And that's really the space that we're in. So when Dallas-Fort Worth last year decided that they were going to look at alternative ways to basically increase efficiency at the gate and the turnaround time for planes. I just relish that. I just wanted us to jump on that opportunity. Being someone that has traveled a lot over my lifetime here, I'm a lifetime platinum at American Airlines. I'm a diamond medallion on Delta. I just love the idea that maybe we could help somehow and drive up the efficiency at the gate. And the goal that Dallas Fort Worth set for this trial that we were doing was to reduce the turnaround time by 20%. So we installed a private wireless network at the gate to handle just luggage scanning, and that's a business critical application, which is very hard to cover with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi doesn't lend itself very well for any type of mobility, and with the very limited reach of these Wi-Fi access points, as you're moving around these devices, you tend to lose a lot of mobility. The other thing, or you tend to lose access rather because of mobility. The other problem you have with Wi-Fi is, of course, security. There's no sort of inherent security protocol for Wi-Fi. And then the last but not least is capacity. Capacity often dwindles, especially when you get a lot of users on the same Wi-Fi network. So we deployed a trial with Dallas Fort Worth and American Airlines, and for luggage scanning, and we had 100% uptime after we deployed this network, and we reduced the turnaround time at the gate by, at the end of the day, 22%, which translated in about 10 minutes saved time per aircraft at the gate. So this is something that for me is super exciting, and this is just one out of very many applications that we can deploy. We can help airlines and airports with. There are really a slew of other applications as well, ranging from automated onboarding applications to even credit card terminals, right, which could be run on these secure, high reliable networks, and then that could offload the Wi-Fi networks, the Wi-Fi network, which still has a really good application for all the passengers and so forth. The passengers can use those networks, and those networks will always be there, and they're going to serve their purposes as well. So there's really room for both here. But we're very much focused on business critical applications, and we're using 4G and 5G for those.
All right. Well, Johan, thanks for that great overview. I think we'll try and bring up Monica as well, and see if we can get a little bit of Q&A here. And again, I have a long list of questions, but encourage you all to submit things as well using the chat box. We want to hear from you. So let's dive into a little bit of this stuff. I know this was a great overview, kind of landscape setting where we're at. But let's dive into a few things a little bit more specifically. And maybe we'll start with you, Monica, but Johan, feel free to jump in as well. So what has changed? I mean, why are these private networks, the 4G, 5G, now available as an option for airports? Has something changed? Have they been around a while? There's just not a lot of discussion about it. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that it's a very good question. Why now? And I think it's a confluence of at least three things, maybe more, but three main things. One is the availability of 4G, 5G. The other one is CBRS for the US. And the third one is new business models, which are allowed. So let me get started. So 4G and 5G, why is it different? Is because those are technologies which allow you to have a sort of simplified cellular network. So the cellular network that the tier one operators run is a really complex thing because you have to support mobility nationwide. Now, with 4G and 5G, you're able to basically scale it down. So it's not like Wi-Fi, but it's not like a public network. So it's something that is manageable from the point of view of an airport or any other enterprise. So that's, and also gives you much more flexibility in prioritizing things, different applications. And with 5G, you're going to have very low latency. So it's much more suitable for this kind of applications than previous generations. The other thing is CBRS, as Johan said, mentioned before, that gives airports very good 3.5 spectrum. Now, why do we care? It's only in the US, by the way, so we are particularly lucky to have that opportunity. But it's also good because 3G is used worldwide on a license basis. So what that means is that there is a lot of equipment and cost-effective equipment, and everything is standard-based. So that's another advantage. The third one is the system, the business model. So there are new business models, and we will talk more about it, that allow airports to not only have their own private networks, but to do so without having to do all the heavy lifting in terms of deployments. And Johan is the person to talk about it more than I am, but that makes a huge difference in terms of being able to do it in a reasonable way in terms of cost, efforts, and things like that.
Johan, anything to add on your end, or did Monica pretty much cover it?
I think Monica covered it really well. Yeah, what I can just add to it, right, is that it's difficult for any enterprise IT departments, maybe at an airport, airline, or a retailer, to go out and procure and then manage a 4G or 5G network. And the reason for that is because that entire telecom communication vendor community is all built and set up around these massive telcos, right? The Verizons, the AT&Ts, the T-Mobiles, and so forth. So what we're helping them with really is to manage that entire process. So what we're doing is we're basically designing, building, and operating this entire network so that airports and airlines, they don't have to add one single employee to their IT department. They can basically get this network, and they will own and they will control this network as if it's their own. But we're designing, we're building it, and I think that makes it easier. That makes the barrier of entry into this much lower, and that's basically our entire business model.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And so let's talk a little bit about the applications for these networks. And Johan, you did a great job, I think, introducing the DFW use case, the baggage claim use case. But what are some other applications where private networks can be deployed to support additional lines of business? We have many of them, I think, in the audience here today. So maybe we want to talk about some different applications. I think Monica mentioned that she had heard of over 200 other applications in the airport world. So let's dive into that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I don't mind. So anything that is, I would say, is business critical that requires a data link is something. So like surveillance cameras, for example, is another one. And another one would be when you think about the maintenance crews coming on board, you're about to take off and you find a problem with, let's say, the lavatory, and they come aboard and they look at what kind of aircraft it is, and they look at the specific specs. Then they may have to download the schematics, and a lot of times they don't have coverage, so they got to go back inside again, download the schematics, look at what's going on, and then come back out again. That takes a lot of time. So another great application, I think, is for these maintenance crews to have access to a reliable, secure network sitting behind their own firewalls the entire time. That also saves time. So anything that is business critical that helps the airlines with operational efficiencies is something that would lend itself very, very well for these type of networks.
Great. And Monica, anything to add on your end in terms of other applications, or I know we have some of them listed up here on the slide, but anything else? Otherwise, there's another question that came in from the audience.
I'm just going to have very briefly. I think that no matter what the list is going to be, it's going to be much longer, because what you see over and over again is that you have an immediate problem you're trying to solve. You do it, and then you realize, what, I could also do something else. So I think that we need to keep the our minds open to what comes next.
Great. Well, we did get a really good question in the chat, but I wanted to introduce it maybe with a preliminary question before we get to it. So we've talked about both 4G and 5G. 5G is kind of the hot topic now, but let's start with 4G. Is 4G enough at this point? Do you need 5G in the airport environment?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I would say for probably 95 to 98% of the applications, 4G is more than plenty. It gives you plenty of speed. And the way we deploy the network as well is that we deploy everything at the edge. Well, what do we mean by that? We deploy an edge cloud network so that the latency, if you have your applications running, they're running very, very close to the actual end device. So that means that the latency is low as well. So 4G is plenty right now. Having that said, though, if you fast forward a little bit, when you think about things like robotics, for example, if and when more and more robotics get introduced, that's really when I think 5G is going to come into play and make a big difference. So there are different ways of deploying robotics, and if you can put a lot of the logic in the robot themselves, and they can make a lot of autonomous decisions. That's expensive. Then you make each device pretty expensive. But if you instead put the logic in the cloud, in the edge cloud in this case, then you need a very fast wireless connection to be able to communicate with the robots. But then the robots themselves are cheaper. Applications like that, it really requires 5G, and that's what 5G is meant for. When you have a lot of different IoT devices, Internet of Things devices, connected devices, and requiring also very low latency. And we're going to see the ecosystem of 5G devices increasing over time. It's not really here and now for the most part, but it's coming, and it's coming quickly. The good thing about 3.5 gigahertz is that is where we're operating our networks here in the US, is that the entire world has selected that as its main 5G spectrum. What that means is that as more and more 5G networks get launched in Europe and China and everywhere else, we're going to see more and more devices being onboarded, coming aboard here with having that same specific frequency that we're using here.
May I add something here? Is that we often think 4G versus 5G as the two, one or the other. But in practice, what you do one first and then the other, and you gradually shift. So I'm not going to comment on every single vendor out there, but a lot of them support a software upgrade from 4G to 5G. So whatever you have out there, you can move, and you might even have 4G and 5G. So it's not one or the other, is both. So that's something to keep in mind.
Well, let's build on a little bit of that, because Monica, that was kind of one of the questions we got, and I'll just ask it and then maybe rephrase it. But the question was, can you discuss the upgrade path for private cellular from 4G to 5G? As airports plan for the next 5 to 10 years, can investment in 4G provide a path to 5G, or will that be a new paradigm of equipment, antennas, radios? So if you want to get started with 4G, maybe it's less expensive. Is it going to be a hard lift to get to 5G? Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, actually, it's not so much the expensive part, because it's actually by and large, it's the same equipment. The issue is, as Johan mentioned before, is the availability of the terminal devices, and so that's why I think that for a lot of airports, it might make sense to have a hybrid network. And you can have the same hardware that supports both 4G and 5G. So, it really depends on what you're trying to do. But clearly, the availability of terminal devices is crucial. And right now, 5G is a new thing. So eventually, yes, you're going to need to go to 5G, but you want to have a path. And so depending on, your selection, the path is going to be somewhat different, but you're going to be able to transition from one to the other. And that, I think, it's a crucial thing to keep in mind.
Great. Johan, anything to add on your end?
I agree with what Monica is saying. It comes down to the specific applications that you want to run today, and the availability of the devices first and foremost. And what we see right now is that the 5G devices they're coming to market, but they're not here right now. So 4G is plenty of speed and also latency capabilities in terms of almost all applications that are out there right now. So it's really important to provide that smooth path to 5G, as well as more and more 5G devices are coming onto the market.
Great. No, I think that was a good question. And it also encourage anyone else, please send in questions. I love asking your question, the audience's questions, not mine. I have more access to Johan and Monica. So I encourage you to do that. We did get another one about geolocation capabilities. So can private cellular be used for geolocation? That was the question. Just to give you a little bit of extra context, airports, they use GIS for tracking of vehicles and all sorts of things on the airfield. So with that kind of context in mind, and I think this may be addressed in the report too, but I'll maybe start with you, Monica, and then Johan, if you have anything to add.
Yes, this is an absolutely great question that I love, because yes, you can. And but the interesting part is that, as you say, airports use geolocation already to keep track of things in the field. You have to do it. You use GPS. It's working pretty well, right? So why do you need anything else? And the fact is that when you go inside, you get indoors, then GPS sort of breaks down. You don't have it as good tracking. And so now with 5G, it's possible to do accurate geolocation indoors as well. So you can use it outdoors, but outdoors you have GPS, so that's not as crucial, but you basically can have it indoors. So as your vehicles go from indoor to outdoors, you have a continuous ability. And this is getting better. Now, this also raises another important issue, that 5G, whatever it is today, is evolving, right? So as you have your 5G network, or 4G network for that matter too, as the standards improve, the capabilities of your network improve as well. So the resolution right now is, I think, 2-3 meters, but it's going to go down to the sub-meter level pretty soon. So you're going to benefit from this increase in the performance as you go through. And this is different than if you have a proprietary solution where you are tied to whatever the vendor is doing.
So when they're, and sorry to cut you off, Johan, but if an airport is using a cell phone or other things to track certain devices, if they're connected to a private network, it's just going to have more accuracy with the.
Yeah, you basically whatever device you have there that is connected to the network can be tracked.
Got it.
Maybe I can talk about a specific application there. So when you look at luggage tracking, right? So when your bag goes onto the belt and it goes underneath the terminal and it gets picked up, it gets scanned, and then gets put on one of those trucks, and then the truck takes it to the aircraft, right? There's a gap there in connectivity today, where there's no coverage. We are all used now to having specific applications from the airlines where we see, okay, your bag is now on the plane. That's good. But before it gets on the plane, there's actually a fairly good amount of time there where it's not tracked really, and there's a big risk of it, or there's a risk of it being lost, and that's usually where it gets lost. So if you think about the sort of the future here, right, where you have wireless connectivity there, where you have baggage tracking, where you have little IoT devices sitting in these trucks. Now you can map the truck to the actual baggage itself, right? Now you can actually track with the capability that Monica described there, you can actually track your bags, so you know exactly where it's at the entire time, and you never lose track of it. And I would argue that's a great use case for airlines not losing as many bags moving forward.
Hey, I have something that I have to say. Wouldn't it be really cool that you go in, you check in, and you can see your bag throughout, as you get into the plane? I love that. Sorry.
Yeah, if I could pull up my American app or some other, airline app and then see where my bag's at, that would give me a lot more comfort of mind. If I see it being flown across the country while I'm still at the airport, that would be a problem. But anyway, well, great question. Again, keep submitting those. But let's talk about just the private 5G or private networks versus Wi-Fi. So I know we've talked about this a little bit in the opening remarks, but does this mean that airports are going to have, if they were to get one of these networks, does that mean they have to replace their Wi-Fi systems? How do these things, let's talk a little bit more about how they kind of can coexist, the different applications for them. And maybe we'll start with you, Monica, unless Johan wants to cut you off, you can do that too, but.
Let me get started. I love Wi-Fi. I've been doing a lot of work on Wi-Fi, so I'm definitely not biased against it. But different technologies, different wireless technologies have different purposes. And as we move on, we need more of them rather than less, because we need more connectivity, and so you need more networks. And Wi-Fi, the greatest thing is its success, but it's kind of a victim of its own success, because I don't know about you, but every time I go to an airport, the first thing I do pretty much is to get onto the Wi-Fi network. And so you have a huge number of people that want to be on Wi-Fi. They want to continue to be on Wi-Fi. So the airports will still need that network, if nothing else for that. But because of everybody wants to get on Wi-Fi, what happens is that the network is there's just so much you can do with the spectrum that you have. And that's where you need, as an airport, you need to have a different way to run applications that have a different level of security, reliability, latency, that only a private network can, or a cellular network can provide. So the question is you don't replace it, you just keep it, operate it, and but you need something else.
Yeah, that was well said. And by the way, where I'm from, ladies first, so I would never cut you off, Monica. You go first. But thanks for the invitation, Justin. So, but no,
Yeah,
I would say I love Wi-Fi too. Wi-Fi is a great application for me when I'm traveling as a passenger. I want to fire up my laptop and so forth, right? But here's the deal: if you don't control your spectrum, you don't control the quality. So what I mean by that, right? So if you have business critical applications, which you do as an airline and as an airport, you don't want to be reliant on something that can go down at any point in time because it can be congested, because anybody else can jump on that spectrum. And that's really what Wi-Fi is. And that's why our specific applications that we're going after are business critical, where Wi-Fi really doesn't fit well. So that's kind of how I would differentiate between the two, but you're going to need both.
Well, thanks for that, Johan. And so let's shift a little bit to the relatively recent controversy that we're still dealing with here as an organization. And Dan pulled up a really great slide that I think you prepared, Johan, to illustrate for purposes of this discussion. This has been a big issue. I mean, even for AAAE and airports, this idea of the C-band deployment. There's been a lot of confusion. We've even heard it from FAA. FAA has been asking us to make it clear to airports that the controversy is over the C-band specific spectrum network deployment that AT&T and Verizon are doing. It's not 5G in general. So educating on this has been really difficult on our end. So can you talk about this? Can you put this recent controversy in a little bit of context for people and how it kind of works with the other private 5G that we've been talking about?
Yeah, you're right. Mainstream media kind of made a mess of this, didn't they? They made this out to be a 5G issue. It's not a 5G issue. It was a very specific spectrum issue. But even so, I feel that it was still a little bit unfair, actually, towards the carriers in this case, that I've spent a lot of money. That I spent upwards of $86 billion just in acquiring the spectrum called Cband. The Cband operates between 3.7 gigahertz and 3.98 gigahertz. And the altimeters, they operate in the 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz band. That's a 220 megahertz guard band there. many years ago, when the FCC were looking at awarding this spectrum, auctioning the spectrum, they asked the airline industry, they asked Boeing in particular, to look at what would be an acceptable guard band. And Boeing came back with a report stating that they needed about 100 megahertz. So the FCC gave them 220 megahertz. But then of course, we're all extremely interested in airline safety. All of us are, right? That's a public interest, of course. So there were some concerns there about this specific spectrum. But I think at the end of the day, it's physics. So it's all about the guard band, how much guard band you have, and then what is the strength, the watts, basically, the strength of the signal that you're putting out. So I think at the end of the FAA and FCC, the two controlling bodies, along with the two industries, the telco industry and the airline industry, they came to an understanding around this, so that the C-band is still being deployed. So Verizon AT&T, they're building out 5G on this very good spectrum right now, and they're doing so, with a lot of knowledge that has been accumulated over decades in terms of how this spectrum, which at the end of the day comes down to physics, actually works. So I think we can all feel very safe that this issue has been vetted. A lot of people, a lot of scrutiny have gone into this, and we have found a solution, a way forward. Then when it comes to other spectrum, like the CBRS spectrum, which we operate in, for example, that's further below, that's south of this C-band spectrum, so that's even farther removed. So again, this is not a 5G issue at all. This is a specific spectrum issue, and some very specific devices here that could potentially, have been impacted if this wouldn't have been looked into very carefully, which I absolutely believe it has at this point in time. So hopefully that answered the question, Justin.
May I add something very quick here? And you explained it perfectly. I would like to add that something, that it is a spectrum issue, but it's also a coordination issue. It could have been dealt much better. So I hope that from this we're sort of learning that for next time around, we're not going to have this problem again. And so there has been so the FCC is now trying to work more closely with NTIA and hopefully with FAA. So I think that what this brought to our attention is the fact that all these agencies need to talk more to each other, so that the next time around we don't have the same problem again, hopefully.
I could not agree with you more, Monica.
Well, being here in Washington, I'm always a little bit skeptical about their ability to communicate with each other, but that's the goal. There's been enough scrutiny on this topic, so hopefully that will improve going forward. But I think it's also important to point out, I think you may have done this, Johan, but the private G network it operates on a band that is even further away than C-band is relative to the altimeters, which have been the kind of safety critical equipment at issue here. And I know we've been hearing that the airlines and altimeter manufacturers are upgrading their equipment to filter out certain problematic interference, and they're improving their performance so that they can eliminate some of those issues. So hopefully we're on the right path forward. But anything else on this before we transition?
I would argue that they have a pretty big guard band, so they don't have to.
Yeah,
there are a lot of filters that they could use to make altimeters very safe.
Awesome. Well, we could probably take that down. I think we can go to one question that came in from the audience. So maybe we'll start with this one and then go a little bit broader. But the question, and I think we'll start with you, Johan. Can you speak to the antenna placement, particularly for airside coverage? So can they be mounted to an exterior terminal wall, or do you need it to be at a higher elevation tower, say on the terminal roof, or a third-party tower? I know DFW, I think they have a hotel right in the center of their facility, and that they can broadcast stuff down. But for most airports, talk about antenna placement.
Yeah. So when we do our we call it RF design, we look at there's always an ideal case where we want everything, but then there's also practical reality as well, right? So we have, I would say there's a lot of flexibility in how we mount these. In the specific case of Dallas-Fort Worth, we, for example, mounted an antenna right next to the jet bridge there. So we can mount it on the wall. And then we could sort of direct the signal straight in towards where the luggage is coming down from sort of underneath the gate there. There are other places where we mounted on sort of a smaller pole, which is like outside of the gate, between taxi runways and so forth. So there's actually a lot of flexibility in terms of how we mount them. One of the things that we have learned, being 30 years, in this industry, right, and having designed and built network, is that there's so, I mean, you can have so much imagination and degrees of freedom in terms of how you mount these. Sometimes we mount them on palm trees, for example. Not that are many of those at airports, but I'm just trying to give you a sense for the flexibility here, for how we mount them. But at the end of the day, usually comes down to getting the right of ways and filing the permitting and so forth, right? And that's kind of the practicality of this, and that usually is the long pole in the tent when it comes to building these networks. It's not actually building them themselves. It's the where can we put these due to regulations, and where do we have power, where do we have Ethernet and so forth, so that it's easily accessible to the radios. But that's what we've done for more than 30 years. So it's not really rocket science for us.
Well, can you maybe then just elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think some airports may be, especially smaller airports who may want to take advantage of these opportunities, they may be intimidated by all of this, but they want the opportunity to take advantage of see the benefits of a private network. So can you just talk a little bit more, do these airports need to become cellular experts? How does this all work from a practical standpoint? Getting something set up. We talked about antenna replacement. So maybe we just talk a little bit more big picture, how an airport can get started on setting up the network and all of that good stuff.
Yes, I'll take that question then. So yeah, that's our entire business philosophy, really, is to make this easy for anyone, for any enterprise, for any airport or airline that would like to do this. So the question that we will have for the airport or the airline is, what are the applications, what are the devices that you would like to use? And then we look into that. We look into the coverage areas that they would like to have covered. We look into needs for mobility. We look into capacity needs. How many bits and bytes do they need? How much throughput do they need? What are the latency requirements of those applications? And then we make it really easy. We design the network completely, and then we handshake, then we build it, and then we operate it as well. So we do that over multiple years, 5, 7, or 10 years, whatever they want to do, and then we take full end-to-end responsibility for that. So they will, our responsibility is to keep the network up and running, seamlessly. So basically, at the end of the day, they are managing us to an SLA, a service level agreement for the network. That's what they're managing us to. So they don't have to be experts at anything. They don't have to hire one single person in their IT department to take care of this. We're doing that for them. They manage, as they always do, their end user devices, their applications, and so forth. But we take care of the connectivity. We take care of the network. We take care of all of those new things, right? It could be a bit daunting for new enterprise moving into this space and taking advantage of this great opportunity that has presented itself with CBRS.
Sorry, I don't mute. Anything to add, Monica, on implementation or otherwise? I know it's probably a little bit more specific to Betacom and Johan, but wanted to give you the opportunity as well.
Actually, yeah, let me just add a quick thing here is, what Johan said, they can do it, an airport can come back and say, well, I can get a mobile operator to just plan it and build it for me. What's the difference? And I think that's exactly back to, the fact that, there in a private network, you decide what you're going to get into your network based on your needs. If you have a mobile operator, so basically use a public network, you are much more constrained to what's already there, or what the way the operator is going to deploy the network, because that's the nature, that's the whole point of a public network, to serve a variety of users. And so you cannot be as customized as specific as meeting specifically the need of the airport. And I think that this is really important to understand. Back to my initial point of flexibility, in order to have flexibility, you need to have some control. In order to have some control, you need to basically own the infrastructure, whether you do it yourself. I mean, most airports are not going to be able, we're not going to want to do it themselves. So you're going to get somebody to do it, but you want to have control. And that's the ability to control what the network is doing and how it's built, that it's really crucial, I would say.
Yeah, Monica, you had a great point, and that was one of my questions, was the private versus public aspects. Most people hear private, it implies secure, it implies personalized. But Johan, anything else to add on the kind of benefits or disadvantages of public versus private?
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of private is that this entire network sits behind the firewall, so the data never leaves the enterprise's firewalls, right? So they never leave the airlines or the airports, secure network. And as cybersecurity is becoming more and more and more relevant, by the day, that's a pretty big security issue that every single IT department is dealing with. And that's again why we're talking about business critical applications. It's not everything, but it's the applications that are critical for business operations. They lend themselves really well for private wireless. For security is one of the main reasons, I would say.
Yep. Well, we did have one question that came in from the audience here, and it might be a little bit difficult to answer just because I'm sure you guys haven't done an industry-wide survey. So I'll just preface it with that and just say answer it to the best of your ability. But the question was, can you give an estimate how many airports have implemented a private 5G network working for airside specifically? What is required on the items to be tracked? As an example, on my bag, the RFID on a cargo container, for example. Any thoughts on that? Just kind of where the industry might be on this. Are most airports on a private 5G using Wi-Fi public? What is your sense? I'm guessing you haven't done an industry analysis on this, but any ideas or guesstimates?
I can take a stab at it first. This is a good question. I would say private wireless is in its infancy right now. So when it comes specifically to the airport and airlines, it's very much being trialed at this point in time. So what I mean by that is that the use cases that are being trialed out are small. And the networks are small because they're in trial phases right now. But we know of several airports that are planning on building this out now for their entire terminals, their entire airports, and so forth. So we're going to start seeing a lot of movement this year and forward in this space. Private wireless was really enabled by the FCC allowing for this spectrum to be opened up. This wasn't even a possibility couple of years ago, right? So that then coupled with, now the technology, you got to keep up, right? So you got to have new devices and so forth that comes into play. So I would say 2020, end of 2021, first half of 2022 is sort of when we're looking at trial phases. Second half of 2022 is when we start seeing real full-scale deployment. That's my perspective. Monica, I'm not sure if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. That's the way it is. I've seen in China there are some that are commercial, and I've been out there, but that's because it's a whole different environment. But what is really remarkable is to see how the big change that 5G network in airports have been bringing to airports. So it's very great to see that.
All right. Well, awesome. I think we're right at 3 o'clock, so probably a good place to end. I just wanted to end by saying thank you, Johan, Monica. It's great to chat with you this afternoon and even before the webinar. Great discussion, super interesting, and I think, Johan, as you mentioned, this is a new area. It's an exciting area. I think the applications are still being developed and imagined at this point. So, and again, thanks to everyone for attending the discussion. You can access the recording if you wanted to watch anything or if you had to jump off later today. You'll be able to use the same link that you used to join us here today to access the recording. So we encourage you to do that and to reach out and contact our speakers if you'd like any more information. You'll also see an email with an evaluation survey. Just quick couple minutes, be sure to complete that. We always like to improve the webinar experience. But again, thanks, Johan, Monica, great discussion. I'm sure we'll be having more of these conversations in the future at different in-person events as well. So we'll be on the lookout for you there. But thanks again, everyone. Have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin and Monica.
Thanks.
Bye.